All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming today. And we're so excited to have Margot with us tonight. I just wanted to welcome everyone who has not come to a meeting before. We're very excited to have you here. For those of you who do not know, we are the New Hampshire chapter of the User Experience Professionals Association. My name is Kyle Susi. I'm one of the board members, and my husband, Roger, he's also a board member. And I would just like the other two board members to just go off mute and just say a quick hello to everyone. Jill Hart.
Hi there, it's Jill, and welcome to everyone. Glad to be able to be together tonight.
Yeah, and Christine Fajardo, if you're on. She might not be on yet.
I think she's
on. Okay, all right. Well, Christine is also a board member, and you know, I always say this, and I just want to make sure you guys know we're here for you. We want to hear any kind of suggestions you might have about speakers or topics you want us to have, you know, topics on for meetings, any kind of socials or anything you want to do. We're all ears, so just let us know if you have any suggestions. I want to mention too that on the UXPA website, you can find our Facebook page, which is just UXPA, Facebook group. We're on Twitter, UXPA, and also we have a rather new Slack group that you can find a link for on our website.
There's also a survey on the website as well. So if you think of any ideas or anything like that, you just fill out the survey and kind of tell us a little bit about you and what you're looking for with the meetings and what you like, what you don't like. There is a question on there about location. So you can answer what you would prefer if we were meeting in person. Otherwise, don't worry about that.
Yeah, who knows how long we'll be remote. But yeah. And just want to mention our next meeting. So we normally take off only 2 months out of the year, and that is August and December for the holidays. This year we're going to do it slightly different. It worked out better for the timing for the presenters. This upcoming talk will be in August, in August, the first week of August. So we're going to kind of skip July, do early August, and we'll hopefully get that posted rather soon. We're just ironing out some details, but this should be a fascinating talk on Mumbai's Dabawalas, if I say that right.
Yeah.
I've got a sneak peek of this talk, and it's just fascinating. It should be a really great service design talk. So stay tuned. That more details for that is coming. Are coming. And just some other events that you want to be aware of. So an event apart is happening in July. This is remote. This is going to be a really great event. I think it's pretty inexpensive, like something like maybe $300. And actually, Margot, you're speaking at this event, aren't you?
Yes, that is right. Me and I think it's 5 other people. It should be a really good day.
Yeah. So check that out, July 20th. And Enterprise Experience is going to be happening virtually, of course, end of August to September 3rd. And I believe maybe early bird pricing just ended for that, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, an email just went out end of last week. So
that's probably over.
Either that or it's getting ready to end. So if it's of interest to you, check it out.
So it's rosenfeldmedia.com. And UXPA International just announced that they are canceling their event. They're not going to do it virtual. They're just postponing till 2021. And it will be same place, same city, Baltimore. So we'll see what happens next year. And UXStrat is still trying to do it in person, September 14th through 16th. I haven't heard any updates about that changing, so we'll see if that actually happens or if it ends up going virtual. And now job opportunities.
Yeah, right. So some of the stuff that's going on locally. Bottom Line Technologies over in Portsmouth has a UX designer role open. Travelers over in Concord has a UX research lead and a product design lead. Oracle in Nashua is looking for a principal UI UX product manager. So if you're the type of person who likes to wear many hats, this sounds like this is right up your...
That's a first for me. Like, I have not heard that product UX UI product manager.
I have.
Yeah.
I have heard things like that. I've seen job descriptions like that.
They get more and more slashy, I think.
Well, you think about like times like this and budgets are tight maybe, and people are looking to cover as many roles as they can. It could also be to try and attract more talent.
Yeah.
So you may say, hey, I'm a UI person, but I do a little UX. Maybe product management might be something I'm interested in. I don't know. Or you could be like me, a former product manager that switched over to interaction design at some point. So they're also looking for a usability product designer and a UX writer. So we're seeing more of that popping up, or UX writing, which is great. Because the whole experience is not just in the interface itself, but also the language that's used online and offline. Tech Systems over in Dover is also looking for a UX designer. Does anybody have any job opportunities that they would care to share with the group at this time? And if so, please unmute and speak up. Otherwise, we do have a channel on our Slack workspace for job opportunities that you can post information there, and always throw it on the Facebook page if you're on that as well. So I'll open it up to anybody that has any open opportunities to share.
Kyle and Roger, this is Bob Thomas.
Hey, Bob.
Hi, I'm a consultant with Eversource, and I believe they're looking for a UX manager in their Manchester office, Manchester, New Hampshire, although right now the position is mostly remote, and I think it can continue to be remote, but there might be occasional times where you have to go into the Manchester office. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to give you more information.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
What would be the best way to contact you, Bob?
Are you on the Slack workspace for NHUXPA?
I am.
All right, so people could send you a direct message through that then, I suppose.
Yeah. Yep.
Sure, and if you would like to, Kyle and Roger and Jill, I could also post the information on the Facebook page.
Yeah.
Oh,
That would
that'd be
be
great.
great. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And maybe your information in the chat window for this meeting.
Okay, yep, I will put that in there right now.
Excellent. Thanks.
Anybody else have any job opportunities they'd like to share?
Yes, can you hear me? This is
Yes,
Henry
yeah.
Snow. Yeah, I'm Henry Snow. It's like we have an opening of a media level or senior level UX designer in California. It's basically, we hope to be in the Bay Area around the San Francisco area so we can meet frequently. And I guess we can give you the job posting through the Slack page or Facebook group, or you guys have some email to access so I can make sure we get the right, the job posting.
Sure. You can also email it to nhuxpa@gmail.com.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else? And if not, is anybody looking for work and would like to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
You always
All
get
right.
crickets there.
That's all right. That's all right. I know.
Okay, sure.
Okay. All right. So with that, we'll go ahead and keep moving on.
I gotta click this.
There we go.
Always get that.
We'd also like to thank our sponsor, Market Street Talent. They were our food and beverage sponsor for 2019, and they've agreed to be that for 2020. So thank you for my coffee. No.
And my virtual pizza.
Virtual pizza, yes, thank you. Market Street Talent is awesome. I'd like to open up the floor. I did check the attendee list to see if we have anybody here.
Jason Robichaud, I believe he should be online. Jason, are you on? He said he was going to try and join. We'll check in on the end at the end and see if Jason's on. But he usually just lets you know a little bit about Market Street Talent. They're awesome. If you're looking, if you want feedback on your resume.
They really focus on the relationship, not only facilitating the relationship between you and the hiring manager at their client, but also they facilitate a relationship, a good working relationship between you and your rep at Market Street Talent. They take a real strong vested interest in candidates that they present to their clients, and they work closely with you at making sure you put your best foot forward and they're going to be straight shooters. They're not just going to tell you what they think you want to hear. They're going to tell you straight up if your resume sucks, or if you're just like bloating,
In
your
a
job
nice way.
description. Well, yeah, exactly. But they're going to cut to the chase because they want you to be your best self. And sometimes we get caught up in the weeds when we're doing job searching and writing a resume or applying for a job, whatever it is. So they're a great company to have in your corner. So with that, I will turn it over to Kyle. But first, there's a couple of technical things here. So as we go through tonight's presentation, I would like to ask everybody to stay on mute. If you do have a question, you can go ahead and raise your hand, and that is something that you do through Zoom and the participants window, correct?
Yeah, on the bottom of the participants window, you'll see the raise hand.
That's right. You can go ahead and do that, and that'll pop up. We'll be able to address everybody's raised hand in turn, and that way we don't derail Margot and let her continue on with her presentation. And Margot, I'll ask you at this point, do you prefer to take questions midline, or would you like to sort of queue them up and address that at the end, just so we can set expectations for how people want to raise their hand?
I think probably if we could kind of queue them up and then take them in turn at the end. And if we do run out of time, because I know this is going into everybody's evening, and I'm happy to take anything else on Twitter at @Bloomstein, or if folks want to email me as well.
All right, great. That sounds awesome. All right, so with that, I'll turn it over to you, Kyle.
Okay, all right. So just to introduce Margot Bloomstein is just amazing, and we're very lucky to have her. For over 20 years now, she has been consulting, teaching, speaking on everything content strategy. She is a brand and content strategist. She is the principal of Appropriate Inc., and she actually wrote the book Content Strategy at Work. And very exciting news, she has a book coming out next year in March, and it's called Trustworthy: How the Smartest Brands Beat Cynicism and Bridge the Trust Gap. And you can go to her website, appropriateinc.com. I'll be putting it in the chat window as well, to be notified when it's released, so that you can get it right away. So I'll let you take it from here, Margot.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
So
and let me know if you cannot share your screen, and I will make you the presenter.
Yes, I cannot share it.
Okay, let me do that. 1 second here. Oh, there it is. Usually it's at the top and I'm looking at it. It's on the bottom. Okay, now. Okay, see if you can share now.
Yes, there we go. Well, thank you, first of all, New Hampshire. I'm happy to be here, and I wish I was here and there and whatnot, but instead I'm coming to you from just a little bit further south in Massachusetts. But I'm really excited to be talking with all of you tonight, because the things that we're going to be talking about, I think, are incredibly important to our work, whether you're a user experience designer, a UX consultant, a writer, a content strategist, more of a pure play designer or marketer. I think that unless we address these issues around trust, everything else that we're doing right now is a waste of time and a waste of our clients or employers' budgets. So let me start by saying that. And then next, I also want to say, I don't trust you. And please don't take that personally, because you probably don't trust me either. I haven't given you any reasons to yet, other than that glowing introduction that Kyle and Roger just offered. But yeah, you probably don't trust me either. And I don't believe most of what I hear. Neither do you. And that's true for most people, probably most of the people in our target audiences as well. And whether you work in supporting brands that are in retail or government or software or some other sector, you've probably noticed how a lot of marketing falls flat now. Sales cycles seem to be taking a little bit longer. And most messages don't really seem to motivate action. And this was definitely a problem before the pandemic, before the recession, but it's something that we definitely need to address right now. People just don't seem to trust brands the way they used to. But I also don't think that we can blame them, because your audience has endured failures of leadership, maybe inconsistent messaging, deceptive practices in the halls of government. That's not the fault of you or the brands that you support. I think it's something that's it's in the air that we breathe right now. They've lost brands that they thought they knew, maybe public figures who used to offer like the final word on the day's news. And when people don't know who to trust, and then they decide not to believe anything, they grow cynical. And maybe you've noticed that among customers or clients. Maybe you've noticed that among colleagues or family members in your Facebook feed. In this age of fake news and hidden agendas, cynicism can often seem safe, maybe comfortable, because as people turn away from experts, they take refuge in their filter bubbles. And then as we saw the problems with those, especially around the last election cycle, people eventually turn inward because that's where maybe they feel most comfortable in saying things like, can't trust anything. I'm just going to go with what feels right, go with my gut. But that's where they can start to distrust even their own gut instincts. And when they lose confidence in their own ability to make good decisions, whether they express that explicitly or not, they grow cynical. And that's a problem regardless of the industry in which you operate. And I think when they're turning inward and growing cynical, that is exactly where you need to meet them as anyone that works in user experience design. Because to regain your audience and their trust, you need to rebuild their confidence. You need to rebuild their self-confidence and empower them to make good decisions. Don't just stoke their cynicism. We've seen how politicians do that and maybe how some companies do that, blaming everybody for problems but themselves. So don't stoke their cynicism. Instead, affirm their hope, their interest in learning, maybe their enthusiasm for feeling knowledgeable. We all want to feel smart. We all want to feel like we're making good choices and getting good information to make those choices. And I think as a marketer or a designer or a writer, you already have the tools to do that. So I want to talk about a powerful combination of voice and volume and vulnerability and how you can use that to empower your audience, regardless of the audience you serve, and regain their trust. Because if you lose your users' trust, you've lost your users. So the stuff that we struggle with around trust and communication, people in the 1500s struggled with that too. And then this need for information, trustworthy information, was changing. So I want to take us back to the 1500s. We gotta go back before we can go forward. So previously, people who sold goods, maybe it was candles or cloth or salt, they would haul their wares town to town in a region to like markets and fairs and that sort of thing. But in the Renaissance, trading families and empires began to grow as they realized that they could actually reap greater profits, not by going town to town, but by staying put and engaging in arbitrage among multiple cities and countries. The catch in that isn't that they needed good curbside pickup options. The catch in that is that trade merchants needed information that they could trust about those cities. This was a pretty new need that they needed to address. So that brings us to this guy. And I know as you're looking at that, you're seeing like those scraps of paper on the wall. There's sort of like early Post-it notes. Surely he must be kind of like father of information architecture there. No, those little notes up on the wall, those are letters. And this is a painting of George Guise. He was a Renaissance era trading merchant. And he represents this kind of emerging merchant class that ran export and import businesses across all of Europe. Now, that kind of work took like a specialized knowledge about the cities in which he operated. And to make good decisions, he would rely on people who lived in those foreign cities to write him periodic updates about the economic conditions, maybe his competition or palace intrigue, or if there was talk of going to war. He would rely on those foreign letter writers or correspondents, those foreign correspondents. They were the first journalists. And a journalist would effectively empower merchants with consistent details, offering a unique perspective on the world, as well as this openness to learning and listening and maybe having a different hypothesis about what's going on, taking in new information and correcting their hypothesis. They didn't overpromise to know everything, but instead they offered this kind of vulnerability of being open to learn and listen and always grow. And so they kept themselves open to new information. It was to their benefit as well as then to the benefit of the merchants to whom they were writing these letters. So they offered authority and consistency. And that's something that we still value because it empowers us too. And I think it empowers us to make better choices about what we buy, maybe where we eat when you can go out to eat again, how we vote, all of those types of things. So they established authority by sharing a unique perspective with a depth of context that the merchants could kind of anticipate, to know that they were getting like the right level of detail to make good choices. And then also they were sharing how their knowledge was constantly growing. So you can think of that as having a unique voice, the right volume of detail, as well as this sort of strength through vulnerability. Now, authority comes from being willing to go where your audience cannot, maybe because of the danger, or maybe because of the cost, or maybe the depth of experience, or because you have access to privileged information, maybe about the product roadmap or product pipeline, or about different materials that are being used in something that the company is selling. But that idea of authority, of being able to go where your audience cannot, that's why when like Anderson Cooper talks to us from Haiti, we listen, we pay attention. Or when David Chang, the owner and chef of the Momofuku chain and the star of Ugly Delicious, when he takes us to explore crawfish and Asian Cajun fusion food, we listen. When NPR's Ophabia Quistarkton comes to us live from Dakar, or when she sat down with Anthony Bourdain to talk about Senegalese food, we listen to both of them. And we trust their respective authority, the unique viewpoints that Anthony Bourdain could bring to the screen, and the depth of knowledge that they have to empower us with information. And we trust their vulnerability too, that they're willing to learn, that they're willing to engage in new experiences on our behalf, and maybe correct or adjust their own misconceptions as they move through the world, and how they bring us along on that journey as well. It's almost like we're in that position now of being like the merchants of the Renaissance, getting information from those foreign correspondents. Your audience is in that position too, but maybe you're the foreign correspondent that is offering them that unique perspective. So their authority empowers us, and we reward that then in the form of trust. That's important, I think, for anybody that works in UX to wrap their heads around. So I've been reading a lot from Jay Rosen, the press critic, on authority. And I think we can bring a lot of his thinking into our own work. So he says that when people or institutions or brands have authority, we reward it with trust. Maybe we see our interests and priorities and values reflected in their focus and in what they prioritize as well. But when a brand starts to break from what we know and trust, maybe in like the tone of voice that they've established, when it becomes inconsistent, or when they suddenly shift in their values and they're maybe backing a major social justice movement, and we're like, hey, but your board hasn't changed at all, or where you source your products or treat your employees, that hasn't changed at all. Well, that breaks down our trust. And it can be hard to reconcile that with what you already know. And similarly, if you don't provide your audience with content that meets their needs in the length and level of detail that they expect, it's a worse sin than inconsistency. You become irrelevant. And those issues stoke our cynicism, excuse me. Now, those issues add up a lot. And today, across all industries, people are suffering a crisis of trust. And we have problems today with believing in outside perspectives and marketing. And you probably see it when you take off your hat as a UX professional, but you're just another consumer, another citizen, somebody that's reading or shopping or voting. We used to place trust in familiar brands, maybe more established media. Maybe there were organizations that you grew up with, and they reflect your reality. But we don't trust those same institutions anymore because maybe they've been inconsistent with what they promise or what they claim or how they speak to us. Maybe they've gone through big brand revisions and reinventions, and now we're like, I don't know you. Never mind not knowing where to click. I don't know how to trust you or understand who you are. Those creeping inconsistencies are a sneaky, sneaky thing. Because like us, our users look at the world now with more skepticism than trust. We've taught them to do that. And we can blame inconsistency in the media or politics. And it used to be like if we caught a politician flip-flopping, that it would scuttle their campaign. Now we can laugh about it. It's like we're in this golden age of shower shoes. These are not the normal Adidas slides of old. These are from designer Sam Morrison. And when he started marketing these at 30 bucks a pop, they went like hotcakes. And now working from home, they say the times find us. So if you're working from home, perhaps you too are rocking a pair of these right now. I can't blame you. I mean, they're perfectly suited for the moment. But when the institutions that we once trusted tell us not to trust the evidence of our own eyes, our own lived experiences, there's a word for that. We call that gaslighting. And it affects our very ability to trust both other brands and ourselves, our own gut instincts and our own perceptions. And if people can't trust their own judgment anymore, we have a problem. And today, this kind of insidious cynicism, it undermines all institutions, journalism and government services, public health, and every sector of our economy. And if you're in UX or design or marketing or kind of broader communications, you have to know that that creeping cynicism, it's a problem undermining your work. But I think that you're well positioned to address it too. So here's kind of the secret, the problem statement, if you will, for the future of our work. To regain their trust, we must empower our audiences. So if you work in marketing or content or UX or design, you've got the tools already to do it. So whether your users are consumers or citizens or donors or voters, to regain their trust, we need to empower them. This involves some ceding control, offering more education, maybe investing more in content that helps them self-educate and helps them feel more confident about their ability to self-educate. And by educating them and rebuilding their confidence in themselves, you also regain their trust in your organization. So this gets us back to that idea of authority. Marketing is a form of authority. It's saying, I'm here, you're not, let me tell you about it. And brands that can teach us about their product category, that's coming from a position of authority. Your go-to apps and websites, they speak from a position of authority, and maybe they're willing to risk bold action or prototype in public and get feedback from their users on the fly. And also demonstrate accountability when they mess up, when their CEO says something horrible, when they're caught doing the wrong thing. That's vulnerability. And it isn't a weakness, it's a strength. Being able to say, I did this, we did this, speaking in the active voice and claiming that accountability, and then saying, here's what we're going to do to make up for it. So if your users are slipping away or greeting you maybe with more skepticism than loyalty, your authority is eroding, trust is eroding. And once we understand how and why, then we can start to address it. Because yeah, we're in a really difficult place right now. Nobody's questioning the state of our economy and kind of those sort of slowdowns in marketing cycles. The erosion of trust is crippling every industry that sells products or offers services or attempts to inform or persuade. But there's hope, and that starts, not surprisingly, maybe to this audience, with our users, with how we empower our users. Because if people are looking inward for answers, we should meet them there. So to regain your audience's trust, you want to empower them with useful, usable information, and it has three main components. It's voice, volume, and vulnerability. And they're those same tools that the Renaissance era letter writers knew so well. So voice refers to the distinct personality that manifests verbally as well as visually in everything your brand does. So do you project a sense of tradition and maybe reliability, tried and true kind of nature, or more of a sense of cutting edge innovation? Are you witty and polished, or maybe more scrappy and creative? Your brand's voice helps your audience distinguish it from your competitors. And it also helps to humanize the organization. It helps to humanize the brand and elevate what you think is most important. It tells your audience who you are, how you are, and if you're someone that they can trust. Now, when a brand changes over time, maybe pursuing new offerings or changing its voice, it runs the risk of breaking that trust. It runs the risk of alienating its audience. But by using a consistent voice to expose changes and educate the audience in plain language, audiences, users can maintain their confidence, not just in the brand, but also in their own knowledge of where it's going. I want to take a look at maybe a familiar example of that. So MailChimp, the email marketing platform, they've helped their voice evolve over time. They started out as a small business serving other small businesses. It used to be very easy to get in touch with the CEO, and they had that level of responsiveness and rapport with their audience. But as they were helping small businesses become more successful, they also became more successful. They had to lose Freddie, the mascot, who used to serve up copy and error messaging and appeared throughout the platform. But over time, they matured. They're no longer a small business. Now they handle more than 60% of the world's email marketing. And they've added services too beyond email marketing, stuff like e-commerce. But they never wanted to alienate their existing customers. So they've worked to maintain aspects of their brand, even as they've removed other things. So copy remains in the first person, but now the tone is more robust. They vary the tone while maintaining the voice. And they vary it based on the expertise of their audience, maybe the recipients of the emails that they're sending. Branding still uses this familiar yellow-based color palette, but the illustration style has become more nuanced. So people trust MailChimp in part because their voice is familiar and consistent. It isn't monolithic, but it's maturing. They tweak it a bit. They tweak the tone a little bit depending on the channel and depending on the context and recipients. So if you can think about how your style guidelines might support that variation and maturity and growth over time, your audience can value that sort of brand extension, as well as your writers and designers, your content creators can appreciate it too. So just to take a look at this a little bit, within their marketing and voice and tone guidelines, they've created documentation like this that says, okay, if we're sending something to somebody that they call a beginner that's maybe either new to marketing or new to the MailChimp platform, this is how they're going to be writing to them. But if instead they're sending it to a longtime customer or somebody that is migrating over to MailChimp, but they've been in marketing a long time, then they're able to bring in maybe slightly more technical language, go into greater detail with things. Now, I want to move on from voice because I think that that's something that's pretty familiar to most people that work in UX. I want to talk a little bit more, though, now about volume. And by that, I don't mean how loud you're speaking, but rather how much you're saying, the volume of detail that you're putting out there, again, both visually and verbally. So if your brand's voice addresses how you communicate, volume refers to how much you communicate in length and level of detail. So how do you know how much to say on a topic? Do you prescribe maybe long blog posts and product descriptions in terms of character counts? Are you offering image galleries that convey the essence of a product or process? Or do they need to have 60 some images in it to convey a comprehensive experience? We know that brevity and bullets have ceded space to long form content online, even on e-commerce sites. But that trend isn't a license to babble. We also know that people really appreciate having very detailed imagery to dig through in some contexts when they need maybe that level of technical reassurance. But then there are other cases where we say with our choice of content types, just give me like the surface level information that I need so that I can put together this bookcase. Thank you very much, IKEA. So the answer for, how do you even know how much detail to offer? How much content is enough? That comes through in user research. And you know you've offered enough detail when your audience can make good decisions and then feel good about the decisions they make, when they're reducing their rate of returns on products, or when they're able to make quick decisions easily and quickly moving through a site without having to click through a whole lot. So let's take a look at volume from the perspective of a pretty local brand, America's Test Kitchen. They earn attention and love and loyalty because they empower their audiences by meeting them where they are, whether it's somebody that is a novice chef or somebody that is incredibly experienced in the kitchen. They offer the right level of detail and the right amount of content for their mindset, their channel, and their device. So some chefs that want all the advanced techniques, they're able to flip through the magazine or dig into the website and find out all about that. However, if somebody's trying a recipe for the first time and they're pulling it up just on their phone because they're like, I don't get the magazine, I'm just doing this for the first time and I'm not normally in the kitchen anyhow. And if they're just flipping through a recipe maybe on Instagram, they can get quick summaries of all the instructions without all the additional backstory. So if you're not familiar with the brand, America's Test Kitchen produces TV shows, cooking school shows. They rework recipes in Cook's Country. There's Cook's Illustrated magazine, cookbooks. There's a Twitter feed. As I mentioned, there's the Instagram feed. And they all produce content types that are ideal for the specific reading and use case. So again, on the phone, you'll find swipeable recipes that are full of immediately actionable photos where the steps are just in the captions of those photos. If you pull up the same recipe that is on a different platform, or maybe see it in the magazine, you'll find more richly detailed images and paragraph after paragraph about those different cooking techniques and maybe the different variables in it. You can also find then related information that you don't necessarily need when you're standing in your kitchen and you're like, yikes, I really should look at a recipe for how to do this thing. But if you're just kind of digging through maybe the website or a magazine, that's where you'll find like the related articles about the history of particular ingredients or techniques, or maybe the geopolitical implications about sourcing particular spices and peppers and all. They invest in an appropriate level of detail to basically help you engage your senses. This isn't about being fast, it's about getting it right. So they're not focusing on the insights of one expert or one big chef ego. Instead, they're trying to just elevate the science that drives their publishing. They're focusing on selling empowerment, not a cult of personality. And that idea of empowerment, how do we help people to help themselves? How do we help people to feel successful wherever they encounter our brand? That drives like a main part of their ethos, that success breeds confidence. So how do we set our users up for success wherever they choose to encounter us? Because if we're empowering people to find our brand, engage in our brand across so many different platforms now, how do we ensure that we're always offering the right amount of content, the right level of detail in that content, that they can be successful regardless of the platform, regardless of the context or their level of expertise? If we take a look at electronics retailer Crutchfield, we see kind of a similar story there. It's another example of volume where they have really long pages. You can see where I kind of blew one out there. And you can tell it's a pretty long page about choosing a camera lens and some of the different variables that go into it. What happens when people see those long pages with lots of different content types on them that are visual and verbal, and there's bulleted lists, there's long form paragraphs. What happens when they get to the end of one of those pages is typically people in their audience say, give me more. I want to read more about this thing before I'm ready to buy it. That's what they know about their users, at least. This is another case where education drives empowerment, empowerment drives confidence, and then confidence drives trust. As their consumers learn more about a product category, learn more about a particular item that they might want to purchase, they're able to then make a more confident purchasing decision. And they can tell that from low return rates. Also, an incredible amount of loyalty from people that maybe don't buy there immediately, but they keep returning to get more and more knowledge until they feel like they can make a confident purchase decision. But that idea of how much is enough to feel confident, that's something that gov.uk also had to resolve, and they have very different results there. So in the UK, it used to be that citizens could get information about government services and benefits from 9 different government websites, plus The Guardian, the newspaper website. And in fact, for kind of the official canonical version of information, they would frequently turn to newspapers over government websites because there was just so much variety in what they were seeing. So the government's answer to volume, to that sort of platform proliferation and content proliferation, was to refine things and edit it back to say, we don't need all of this. We don't need all these versions. And in fact, we shouldn't be creating content on all these topics anyhow. They adopted the ethos that not all topics needed more content to earn trust. Sometimes content just needed to signal that it was the one single resource and that what you saw there was complete and canonical, official. They also adopted the belief that government should only create content on the things that only government could create content on. So that meant doing away with information about how to choose the perfect jumper or sweater for weather conditions on a particular day, how to do away with information on choosing bees and acquiring bees for beekeeping, but instead they kept the information on how to appropriately pay taxes on your beekeeping operation. So they pared it down to the essentials, rewrote, revised, went through an enormous content design effort, and the government digital services team cut that content from 75,000 pages that they were creating and maintaining to just 3,000. That's enormous. It's an enormous editorial effort, an enormous content audit and culling effort that created a much better, more trustworthy user experience. So how do you know when you have enough content? Again, user research, user testing. They put people in the room to say, all right, how do you get information, and do you feel good about the information that you just got on maybe paying your tax bill? And frequently they were hearing things that was like, that's it? This came from government? Well, I guess I'm done. And that sense of, I did it right and I guess I'm done, that's a rare thing for many government organizations to hear, but it doesn't mean that we can't pursue that as well. You have enough content when your audience can make decisions quickly and feel confident that they've made the right decisions. Now, this means that content design and information design are as much a part of content strategy and user experience as is building an editorial calendar to support long-form publishing. None of this is fast, but it's about helping and empowering our users, not just ourselves. So individually, a consistent voice and the appropriate volume are characteristics of good brand-driven content strategy and user-centered design. I think we can agree on that. It's through vulnerability and efforts in that those efforts in voice and volume can actually unite to foster trust. So if you feel like your brand is willing to risk criticism, maybe ridicule, or rabid customer feedback by revealing hard truths, or maybe embracing and digging into confounding challenges, I think you can find that the risk you face is far less than the reward that your brand can appreciate from it. You make your brand vulnerable by engaging in that kind of transparency. And again, I don't want you to mistake it for weakness. The smartest brands grow stronger by owning their mistakes and embracing vulnerability, maybe prototyping in public to show how they're evolving and learning alongside their audiences. And by operationalizing vulnerability, you can expose your brand to criticism and input that can help you grow and help you get better and stronger. And also reap a more engaged community and more loyal brand champions. That's something that Penzeys Spices has discovered and really worked to their advantage. So sometimes vulnerability means putting a stake in the ground and saying, this is what matters to us. This is who matters to us. This is what we believe in. And by declaring what your brand stands for, you have to accept that it may alienate some customers. And we talk about this like putting yourself out there. And when you're a company and you put yourself out there, the impact is that you can find your community as long as you're doing it in an authentic way. I know we toss around this term authenticity a lot. I think what we mean by that is when our actions align with our messages, That's an authentic experience for both the brands that we represent and our audiences. So in the wake of the 2016 election, Bill Penzi, the owner of the Penzi's Spices chain, it's spread across the country now, he took to Facebook to make clear that the company's positions on immigration and racism and other issues didn't align with who had just been elected to the White House. And he felt that a presidential candidate who stoked hatred of immigrants ran counter to the company's purpose. And he said that was to bring people together around cooking as an act of love. And to preempt people who might have said, hey, stay in your lane, you spice shop, he shared how cooking is political. Our family favorites, your family favorite recipes, they probably represent the story of human migration, wherever they came from and all. And they're still flavored with spices that are sometimes sourced from regions that are scarred by wars. So cooking is inherently political, and he felt that it was within his company's purview to take a stand on all of that. Now, of course, his position, it drew a lot of headlines and a lot of criticism, some hate mail, but also a lot of very positive attention. And the company did lose some customers, but then they also saw their sales spike to record levels. And that repeated every single time that they would take a political stance, maybe in a big Facebook post. And he does write really, really long Facebook posts. They've actually enjoyed an increase of some 50% in their online sales. And as more and more people have shared his posts, they've also seen how their audience has expanded as well. So they're not just selling more to their existing audience of cooks and whatnot. Now they're attracting people who say, I don't cook, but I like your politics. So let me buy spices from you and use it as a Christmas present or something along those lines. So there's definitely seeing like more and more traction with people that are shopping there just for gifts. And in contrast, we can look at their closest hometown competitor back in their home state of Wisconsin. They took a different approach. After Bill Penzi made this initial statement, the other company, the Spice House, they offered a discount code of no politics. And they spoke out and they said they felt that business had no place in sharing politics. Now, we can look at like the recent Edelman Trust Barometer. We can look at a lot of industry reporting that shows, no, consumers do want to know the politics of the companies that they support. They expect them to share a lot of that now. But this company, they took a stance that said, we're going to stay out of politics. And that's a stance that reflects privilege. It reflects the privilege that is not shared by people that are affected by discriminatory policy. So it's a political statement in itself. And we can see that vulnerability, like voice, is an act that tells people who you are so that they can make more informed decisions about doing business with you. Now, Penzi's used content to help its community self-identify, but sometimes your brand can be vulnerable in other ways, maybe by engaging your community, by prototyping in public, especially if it's an opportunity to show your audience how you're learning too. This is a great time for so many brands to be learning, whether it's about learning to engage in different ways by convening public forums on Zoom or by putting a stake in the ground and saying this is how we're learning to maybe better support Black people within our community and improve our own business at the same time with regards to diversity and inclusion. This is an okay time for brands to say, we don't know everything, but gosh, do we want to learn? Maybe we've made mistakes in the past, but we want to do better, and here is how. So if we take a look at BuzzFeed, for example, they do it live to kind of roll out a beta and then get input from their entire audience. And this level of vulnerability demonstrates trust in their audience. And then as their audience contributes to a better product, they also increase their trust then in the brand. Now, as I said, it does take vulnerability to say, we don't have all the answers, so let's discuss. But organizations that do that convene the conversation, they're kind of freeing up their audience. They're ceding some control to their audience to say, yeah, look elsewhere. And that's another thing that BuzzFeed does pretty well. So it can mean saying that what we offer is not comprehensive, but we respect you, our audience, to kind of gather more information. And we want you to be smart about this. We want to empower you with more information. So we host opposing viewpoints. BuzzFeed does this by bringing in outside voices. So at the end of many of their articles now, they'll have outside your bubble, where they're hand curating comments from Reddit and Facebook and Twitter about the different topics that they've been writing about as well. By linking out, they're saying, go read elsewhere and then come back so we can continue to talk about it and be more informed in our debate. They're not looking to limit their audience's worldview. They're saying kind of a sort of a, I don't know, you might be familiar with it around here. It's saying, go test drive elsewhere, but shop us last. And I think that that's something that many organizations that work in the retail space or that support retailers can do as well, by saying, let's test our product or the variables in it against some of our competitors, but let's have that conversation right here on our site. Now, it's risky for a brand to do that or to put a stake in the ground, but it takes even more vulnerability to acknowledge deficiencies and ask for help. Now, maybe your company has screwed up and employees or critics or customers are demanding an explanation and some degree of accountability. Maybe that portrait of vulnerability is all too familiar. And you probably realize then your organization is at its most vulnerable when you're staggering away from mistakes and when you're wounded by those errors of judgment. And whether blame is broad or more focused like a spear at one person in one role at the company, it's what comes next that matters most. Do you double down on defeat and say, oh yeah, those hateful words, we really did mean that? Or do you embrace opportunity? Maybe you're familiar with these little gizmos. This is the fidget cube, and it was a huge Kickstarter campaign a few years ago. ANSI Labs designed and then produced these through that Kickstarter campaign, and it was a Kickstarter campaign that went off the rails. They had 400 times more people backing it than they had initially anticipated. So of course, then they had a hard time keeping up with demand. And those challenges continued to increase exponentially over the course of the campaign. Manufacturing problems cascaded into shipping problems. And then the product that they had once described as the perfect Christmas stocking stuffer didn't finish shipping until the following April. So it didn't really work so well as a stocking stuffer after all. People were upset. They were really angry about this. So what did the company do? Well, they started out by frequently updating their audience. They were posting a lot on their Kickstarter page to explain what was happening. They brought their audience closer to say, here's what we didn't anticipate, and now here's what we have to learn about this particular manufacturing operation or these warehouses that we're working with. So they explained what was happening. And then when they started fielding more than 2,000 incoming emails a day from angry customers, and they realized that they weren't being responsive enough, they started talking about that too. They acknowledged that problem in an update, and then they said, okay, we're adding a few more people to the customer service team. And then as they eventually started shipping out product, giving updates all along the way, customer feedback started to become more and more positive. They've since launched other campaigns incorporating what they learned through that process to apply those lessons. And they're being just as vulnerable, just as transparent, and trying to do a better job of respecting their audience. So I want to talk just briefly a little bit more about where we all are today. Let's talk about Zoom. So recently, we've seen over the past couple of months, Zoom has offered a masterclass in vulnerability. So in 2019, toward the end of last year, they rolled out a robust phone version, and they also implemented a range of new features like advanced virtual backgrounds, the waiting room, password protection, and those are features that would soon prove to be valuable in ways that they hadn't even anticipated. Now, as businesses responded to COVID-19 by mandating that people work from home, and as schools started to embrace remote learning, turns out that usage of Zoom exploded. You probably spend a good chunk of your day in it still. So now 90,000 schools across 20 countries have jumped on the platform. And families are connecting for birthday celebrations, holiday meals, maybe virtual visits and happy hours with family and friends and all. And in December 2019, so before that virus reached pandemic proportions, Zoom was seeing no more than 10 million daily users. And most of them were business customers. So they had an IT department supporting them. By March of this year, that number had skyrocketed. So by that point, the platform was seeing daily users of 200 million participants. So they've gone from 10 million to 200 million daily users in the course of just 4 months. That's amazing. But now you're seeing families and friends and preschool teachers and university professors and professional speakers and conferences all using this platform in ways that they had never anticipated. They're also using it in ways that it hadn't been designed and without the support and guidance of an IT department who might have said, hey, why don't you password protect your meetings? So preschool teacher, you're not encountering Zoom bombers during it. Or maybe enable the waiting room so that you can screen who's coming to your happy hour. Zoom realized this pretty quickly when they started getting some bad press around that. And the CEO, Eric Yuan, he could have called out those issues. He could have said, hey, you're doing it wrong. But he didn't stoke anger. He didn't blame the Zoom bombers. On April 1st, which was kind of a questionable date to release this, but on April 1st of this year, he wrote a blog post and he said some things that basically made it a model in building trust through vulnerability. So first, he apologized. And you can see there, it's in the first person. He explained what had happened. He offered detail that demonstrated respect for the audience's intelligence. And then he followed it up with a plan to hold him accountable for a resolution. So he explained what had happened. He offers detail here that demonstrates respect for the audience's intelligence. And then he pivots to make this "you're using it wrong" problem into really an opportunity. He was saying things that, yeah, maybe somebody could have said, that's just marketing spin. It's not spin, it's smart. So then he went on in the same blog post to credit the community, saying that dedicated journalists and security researchers have helped us to identify pre-existing problems, i.e. things that we should have known about. And then he moved on to explain what they would do. So first, they were going to enact a feature freeze and then shift all their engineering resources to focus on trust and safety and privacy issues. By the following week, after this post came out, Zoom had made those virtual waiting rooms mandatory and the default on all new meetings. Same thing with meeting passwords. So then he moved on to a plan to hold him accountable for a resolution, him, not his team. So he's kind of socializing the credit and personalizing the blame. That's something a lot of CEOs can learn from. He says that he's going to conduct weekly webinars, publish a transparency report, submit to third-party audits. So his response was swift, it was specific, and it was transparent. And it's a powerful case study in how to earn trust even while the company is confronting trouble. So voice and volume and vulnerability, they add up to build trust. And that's what your audience needs. And that's what our society needs, especially right now. And I think that your brand, regardless of the industry in which you work, can be a leader in moving us forward, because it's easy to be cynical. I think we've all learned that we can be good at being cynical. We have so many reasons to be cynical, but cynics look at the world and say that it's worse. I think that designers and writers and builders of brands and brainstorms, we look at the world as it is and say, it can be better. And if you're hopeful that it can be, let's work so that it will be. And despite all the reasons we have to be cynical, maybe it's deceitful politicians or deceptive business practices or so much anger spilling into our streets that reflect major problems in our society. The reason people take those actions isn't because they're cynical, it's because they're hopeful. We still respond with hope. We all think that things can be better. We think that we can become smarter and better and kinder, and your organization can affirm that kind of hope. So let's design our way out of cynicism and toward trust. And I think you should do it for yourself, for your users, for your organization, and our society. So let's go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margot.
That was great.
That was powerful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I know you had a hard stop, but I'm not sure how much time do you have for Q&A at this time?
I think we can go probably another like 10 minutes or so.
Okay. So with that, let's open it up. Remember, if you go ahead and look at the participants window in Zoom, you'll see the list of everybody that's there. And at the bottom, you'll have an option to raise your hand. And I will scan the list and call out your name as hands are raised for a Q&A time.
And while people are thinking of questions, I actually had a comment. So I thought it was really interesting when you were talking about authenticity and how some companies, are, whether they consciously choose to be political or not, it's interesting. So recently AMC said, we're not going to be political, and we're not going to have people wear masks when we reopen. And then they had a huge backlash, and now they're making people wear masks because, whether they liked it or not, it got political. But it's just amazing to me how some companies, especially big ones like that, don't think about what kind of message they're sending, especially in this time when they do that. Yeah.
Right. And I think that, so I admit I'm not familiar with the wording of their statement, but I saw the effect of it, or at least the action that came out of it, of saying, we're not going to require masks. But if they would equate that with being political and saying to not mandate masks as being apolitical or non-political, they're just not reading the room.
Right.
And I think for a brand to make that kind of mistake is incredibly, incredibly foolish.
Completely.
It also seemed to me that in your talk, and by the way, I really enjoyed it, that there seems to be this correlation between not only establishing trust, or in order to establish trust, that an organization needs to, or even an individual, needs to have a firm belief and confidence in what they stand for, and is willing to put that out there and express that to sort of, I guess, to create this vulnerability of just exposing their position to their audience, to say, this is who I am and what I represent or stand for as an individual, as a company, whatever, to sort of just pull the curtain back a little bit and reveal a little bit more of the inner workings. And without doing that, it seems that creating trust is going to be much harder and is much more subject to cynicism and just a lack of trust, an opportunity for lack of trust.
Well, and I think again, maybe this goes back to organizations not effectively reading the room, despite all, maybe they've invested in social listening and analytics suites and whatnot. But if they don't realize that users do have so many ways of digging in now and saying, oh, well, what campaigns do they donate to? And who's on their board? And how white is their board? Because we live in an age where information like that is so much more accessible, as well as so much more popular. People are digging in. Their users are already doing that kind of research. So for them to not either clean things up so that their users aren't finding bad information or negative things about them, or to take action that, or produce messaging that goes against their actions, that's pretty embarrassing, I guess, to be in that kind of position.
Sure.
Because they should know better, because their users know better.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm trying to figure out how to raise my hand online, but I'm not sure exactly how to do that. I should know. But could I ask a question anyway?
Yeah, go
We'll
ahead.
allow it.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and such a great conversation, and the present, unbelievable. I just love the framework and the context. And when you talked about you gave a good example of the Zoom and just how that CEO was willing to be vulnerable. Some organizations, though, there's such a structure, and to be vulnerable is so scary. It's like they can't even imagine. If there were maybe, one or two things that you could, share with us that, how do I get my CEO to begin to think in those terms, that it's okay to be vulnerable?
So I think as far as like creating that sort of cultural change. That's one component of it. But I think there are also some maybe more tactical and structural changes that you can consider too. I think that any organization and the people within it can be more empowered to speak openly when they have good governance and style guidelines to rely on. And we see the kind of like a microcosm of this when you see brands engaging quickly, responding quickly to things like on Twitter. When everything has to go through legal review or go in front of HR or something in smaller companies, and it's got to go through many layers and many people have to touch it, that creates a much slower moving organization. You can't say you're responsive if everybody has to be in the room for every decision. But when people within the organization can instead maybe create editorial style guidelines for their use of social media, create governance plans for how they respond in different situations, and have those approved by the legal department, it then allows the organization to create a framework of trust to say to people that do man the social media accounts, for example, to operate within that structure. So they don't need to get everything approved because they already have the guidelines. It requires, though, that organizations can say, well, we're going to hire smart people, trust the people that we hire, and then invest in guidelines to support the people that we hire. So there's like that level of, and I know saying create good editorial style guidelines, that takes some work, but then that saves a lot of time and effort and budget moving forward. To get back to the other part of your question though,
and just, you know, I think that what you just said makes so much sense. It's almost like having that framework, although you're right, it takes a while to get there. Once you're there, it enables the organization to have empowered people who are more nimble too. I think that was awesome. Thank you.
Well, and I think that there's an aspect of that, even including things in your style guidelines that say, this is why we write in the first person singular and maybe sign tweets with like the person's initials. Or this is what, even if you can't go there, this is why we always write in the first person plural and in the active voice. That helps to drive this idea of accountability rather than saying that problems occurred or mistakes were made. It gives you then the tools to say, we did this, we feel like this. And I think that that works across all different types of organizations, even outside of social media too. I know years ago, CRICO, the organization that insures all Harvard affiliated medical practitioners in New England, which is over 100,000 medical practitioners, they started issuing new guidance that said, when you make a mistake, the old thinking was, maybe you try to get out of it. You try to hide the fact, you don't acknowledge it. We're not going to do that anymore because it's better for patients, better for physicians, better for patient outcomes, and better for our bottom line as an insurance company for you to instead accept responsibility and speak with empathy with our patient, to be able to say, I'm sorry. Turned out when they did that, their lawsuit rate dropped. So they were able to tie that level of accountability to cost savings. And I think for a medical malpractice insurer to be able to demonstrate that, that's something that the CEO of any other kind of organization should be able to jump into. So I would say that's the other thing. In talking with a CEO about how to speak with accountability and vulnerability, tie it back to the bottom line.
Right. That's great. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Margot. I think our time is up. If anybody else has any more questions, feel free to reach out to Margot. We can always continue the discussion on the Slack channel. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight and participating in tonight's meeting.
And make sure to sign up for Margot's newsletter to know when her book comes out, and it's appropriateinc.com, which is in the chat window, and we'll post it on Slack and Facebook as well.
That's right.
Thank you, Margot. It was great.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Margot.
Great evening.
Thanks for organizing, guys.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.